So we're going to do a quick recap of what sequencer is to really solidify the information we've just learned. So we have our SHOT1 sequence that we created. And inside that, we have some tracks. So our first track is the camera cut track. And this pointed to our camera. And then the camera had some transform information. I had some extra information like the focal length and the focus. Then on top of that, we also had our mannequin, which also had transform information. And then actually had an animation track. Now this animation track was evaluated over here in this section. We have our timeline. So how this works is when we open SHOT1, sequencer looks at the information here. So it uses the camera cut track to figure out what camera to use. And then for that camera, it applies this transform information and the focal length, moving the camera around the scene and then changing how zoomed in it is. Then I go to the mannequin. It'll move it around the scene with the transform. It will rotate it, it might scale it. And then it'll apply this animation data based on where our playhead is on this timeline. But as soon as we close this, all of these values are reverted back to the default. So the animation resets, the transform of the mannequin goes back, the camera resets back to that initial position we had, the lens changes back, and everything returns back to normal. So you can think of this as a list of overrides to add to the scene. So when it's open, all of these overrides take effect. When it's closed, they're no longer evaluated. A shot is simply just one bit of continuous action. So that's all well and good, but in animated films, we need multiple shots to make a scene. So how do we go about that? Well, we use something called a master sequence. Now, a master sequence is both very simple, but can be very hard to wrap your head around. So we're going to go over it here, and then we're going to go over it inside Unreal, just to really reinforce this concept because it's very important when we're making films in Unreal. So if you've ever used a program like Premiere Pro, Final Cut, Avid, any video editing program, even TikTok, you actually will have an easier time understanding what a master sequence does because it works much like these programs. So we have our master sequence, and in that, instead of using all this detailed information of every object like in the shot, our master sequence actually only has one track typically, and this is called shot track. And like a normal sequence, it's got a timeline. But this one has shots inside of it. Now, these shots are actually other sequences. So our shot 01 would be right here, followed by shot 02 and shot 03. But you can trim these down, snip them, move them around, and do whatever you need to do to create an edit, just like in these other programs. Now the tricky bit is this master sequence and this normal sequence, they're actually the same thing. There is no such thing as a master sequence or a normal sequence in sequence that they're concepts. So a master sequence is actually just a sequence where you've added the shot track and you intend to treat it as your editing sequence, where you're going to be moving shots around and forming an edit. And a shot is just a sequence that you've decided to have all the detailed content for and create the initial scene. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's jump into Unreal and see how we set one of these up and push forward with trying to understand how this all works.